This is Transqat. What is Transqat? Transqat is a safe space. It's a place for respectful conversations about transgender issues. It's a place for queer people to come tell their stories. I'm host Claire McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. Eliot Schrefer is the author of approximately 36 megatrillion books. I'm rounding up there, but you get the idea. Endangered, which is part of his Great Apes Quartet, was a New York Times Editor's Choice Award book and one of NPR's Best of 2012. His sci-fi novel, The Darkness Outside Us, won the Stonewall Honor for Best LGBTQIA+ teen book. Eliot and I spoke last year on this show about his YA nonfiction book, Queer Ducks and Other Animals. It's episode 19 in the feed if you want to look for that. And to be honest, it was one of my favorite conversations of last season. His new novel, Charming Young Man, is available now from Catherine Teigen Books. I ordered it from Amazon, which then sent me a text update reading, and I'm quoting here, "Package with Charming Young Man delivered." I was a little disappointed when I got home and found it was just a book in a box.
Eliot, the last time we spoke, you told me a story about having lunch with a friend of yours, and you were expressing concern that an Eliot Schrefer novel was kind of hard to pin down because you had written so many different types of things. Remind me what your friend told you.
I think this is the story in which the friend told me, actually, there is something that connects all your different books. They're all about outsiders longing to belong. Is that the story? Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going here?
Charming Young Man is yet another line in this train.
It's not a criticism. It's just an observation.
No, I think it's a very astute one. I will continue telling the story till the end of my life.
So this book, or at least the origins of writing it, start in the Seattle Art Museum.
Yeah. So Charming Young Man came to be about 15 years ago. I was in my 20s and I had not yet learned that I shouldn't date actors. And so I was dating an actor who was part of the trial company for Little Mermaid, the Disney musical. And that was out, they were going to do their trial run out in Denver for the summer. And so I sublet my apartment here in New York City. He sublet his apartment. And I was going to live in his hotel room. And while he was in rehearsals, I would write, and then we would hang out in the evening. It all went swimmingly for about 24 hours. And then by day 3 of this summer, we broke up. And yeah, and I had sublet my apartment. I had no money and I had sublet my apartment. So I had nowhere I could go be. We were really moody and teary and 20 somethings. And we broke up over breakfast and I just went to the airport with my suitcase and I walked up to the United Airlines counter and said, where can you fly me today as cheaply as possible? And the United airline ticket agent looked very nervous for a little while and then started typing in and naming cities. And one of the ones she named that had a cheap flight that day was Seattle, which is where my best friend lives. So I booked the flight and I called her from the plane and just said, "I'm staying with you for the summer, thanks." and then
See you soon.
Arrived. Yeah, thank God it was a good friend. She's a very, very kind person. And just arrived. And then we had a mopey weekend of donuts and rom-coms. And then I saw her to her workplace on Monday morning and knew I had to fill my day. I couldn't just go back to her apartment because I would just be all sad. So I went to the Seattle Art Museum and I realized I had 8 hours to spend. And if I did 5 minutes with each piece of art, it would basically fill the 8 hours. So I went through piece by piece, and it was somewhere late in that day, on maybe the 4th floor of the museum, I found this painting tucked away near the men's room of this young pianist named Léon Delafosse, who's the subject of Charming Young Man, the novel I eventually wrote. And it was a painting by John Singer Sargent, and I listened to the audio guide for the painting, and it told me the bare bones of this story that I'd found totally fascinating. He's a young man, grew up in poverty outside of Paris, was a prodigy at the piano. His mother was a piano teacher, and so he had exposure to the instrument when he was young, just like Mozart did. He was a total prodigy, and he entered the Paris Conservatory at the youngest age ever, and then won the first prize in piano at 13, which no one had ever done it that young. Basically, all of French Music Society, which was dominated by like Debussy and Fauré at the time, stopped and looked at this young man, thinking like this could be our Mozart, this could be our real breakthrough composer. And so at the time, you had to play high society parties if you wanted to get a patron. And so Leon entered the patron circuit and played in high society. And on one of his salons where he did a performance, he met Marcel Proust, who was not yet the grand literary figure he is now. He was from my reading of it, a kind of oily, social climbing 18-year-old gossip columnist.
He does not come across well in your book.
No.
I don't want to spoil anything, but
no,
one does not come away with a sense of, oh, I can't wait to spend more time with Marcel Proust.
Yeah, I'm probably working through anger I had over having to read Proust in undergrad and really hating it. And people are so. I know some of your listeners are probably like big Proust fans, and I apologize, but I never took to it.
We regret nothing.
And the kind of rapturous tones with which people speak about Proust make me like him even less. So I kind of lampoon Proust in this book a little bit, but he latched onto Leon, and they tried to gain their way into higher society. Marcel Proust was in the middle class, trying to make his way into the upper class, and Leon was trying to find a patron who was wealthy enough to just give him room to compose and play. Leon meets this Count Montesquieu, who becomes his patron,
who is also an historical figure. He's a real person as well.
Yep. Robert de Montesquieu, who was basically the dandy Count of Paris. He was the Oscar Wilde of Paris, only without the talent, from what I can tell. He had one of his own rings encased in one of his own tears encased in a gold ring, and he would wear it. He had an imported tortoise that he had encrusted with rubies that would walk through his house during parties. He was just a over the top, a real aesthetic, like just interested in like being artificial and larger than life. And he became Leon's patron. And the audio guide just left it kind of up in the air. It just said that Leon had a falling out with the Count, and then the Count poisoned all the connections he had made for this young man, and he basically never lived up to his promise. He never became a big composer, and he kind of disappears from the historical record at the age of 17. So it just made me really wonder what happened. And I think part of it is also due to my heartbreak at the time. I was like ready to see downfall and trouble. So I was kind of working through my own journey by working through Leon's as well.
Well, that's and as Leon looks into that upper class French society, that's the outsider longing to be on the inside here. I'm looking at page 24, 25, where Leon thinks society is people in a room playing a game that no one has told me the rules to. I don't even understand why they want to play. And that is very much part of his journey. He knows he needs to get in because he can't have his music in any real way unless he finds that patron. But they're playing hardball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess there's a way, I was like a financial aid kid from Clearwater, Florida, and I went up to Harvard for college. And I think, I felt like there was this way in which who you knew everyone knew was like the most important thing about college there. And I didn't know that. And I caught on very late and wasn't good. It felt immoral to network or to make friends because of what they could do. And I just remember my freshman year of college, around spring break, people were just all of a sudden at lunch, we're talking about what internships they had lined up for the summer. And I was like, internship? I was just going to like scoop ice cream.
Yeah.
But
there's
working through my own stuff there too, I think.
Well, there is that's part of a class system here in the States as well, where the lower class, the lower middle class come into things with an expectation that you're going to have to work for this. And you're probably going to have to work harder than the other folks. And the upper class has a sense of entitlement. I certainly don't excuse him, but Proust's schemings in this book and his ruthlessness, I understand it, in the same way that Leon, he's got to do something if this music is going to be heard by anyone. So that sort of work ethic of not wanting someone to hand stuff to you, but I'm going to show you I deserve this.
When I think the parameters for what that work means for someone, in the lower class is like it's the talent and drive. That's what will get me access. And I
Yeah.
think Proust has more of a sense, someone from the middle class of there is the place for that, and then there's also the place for the social game. Who, and being charming is part of what Proust knows will get him further. And that's where Leon feels like no amount of talent can overcome the fact that he feels charmless. I mean, the title is very ironic for him. He's
Because of
got
course he
beauty and he's
is.
got talent, but he doesn't have the kind of bon mot, slipping off his tongue.
Right. But he does have a charm when he goes to the play with, I think it's Marcel. He goes to the play and he can sort of feel the gentleman in the theater watching him. There is an allure to him. It's, he's got an appeal. It's just not that Oscar Wilde wit.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think, I always feel like historical fiction has to make an argument for itself about why it should exist, because books that are written by contemporaries in the time are always going to be more accurate to life and to some extent. But I do think in the 1890s, works couldn't be as frank about LGBTQIA plus experiences. And that there is, even though I know by doing research to get there, I'm getting things wrong as I go. It's inevitable. I do think that like intentional erasure of experiences like that, like what would have been, to be someone like Leon, who's not a sexual driver but a sexual object. That I think we don't read accounts of that in historical record. We don't often read about it in cisgender male accounts of today either.
Speaking of LGBTQ, there are a number of other historical characters who are either intertwined with Leon's story or they are adjacent. Let me start with Sargent. We meet John Singer's Sargent shortly after he's painted one of my favorite, the portrait of Madame X.
I'm glad you're already a fan. Yeah, I did a deep dive into Sargent because of this and fell in love with so much of what he's done. Yeah.
So what was the challenge of working in these historical figures like Sarah Bernhardt and Sargent and other folks that I'm blanking on at the moment?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's taking place. The Oscar Wilde trial is in the background. The Dreyfus affair, which is not LGBTQ, but a similar sense of just gross injustice based on anti-Semitism rather than homophobia. But so there are a lot of historical touch points along the way in Leon's story. What was the challenge of working all that in?
Yeah, I guess just on the craft level, one of the real difficulties with historical fiction, or at least I found it difficult, was doing the research to figure out what was interesting. And I would get fascinated by these different moments and characters and famous people, but not also wanting the book to be like a tour through the grand events, the textbook style tour of the 1890s in Paris, right? That Leon just happens to meet every famous person in Paris or brings up every important moment, right?
Although Leon as Forrest Gump seems like a movie pitch to me.
Call Robert Zemeckis there. That sounds great. I'm so ready. Leon Gump.
Run, Leon, run.
Cool, Leon, cool. So I had to like let some things go. So for example, there was a really famous moment where they had like a World's Fair in Paris it was a few years after the Eiffel Tower debuted. It was in the late 1890s. And they were doing one of the first film screenings there, and they used candles to do the projection of this film.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused a big fire, and all the women the fashion was to have giant skirts, and they all caught fire, and I think 80 women died at the fair. And it was said that Montesquieu, this count, used his cane to knock women out of the way and get out of there alive from the fair.
Oh my God.
And he challenged the man who accused him of that to a duel, and they had a duel together. And anyway, I was just so fascinated by it. I was like, I have to put this in the book, but I realized it doesn't pertain to Leon's journey, and it makes, again, the focus about this count, who I feel like already has taken up too much air in the room. My big question for myself was, what happens to shy people in history, right? Like how do we recover their stories in the face of all these extroverts that kind of dominate the room? Anyway, the Singer Sargent to me was, the more I learned about him, the more dear he seemed. Just very, he had a number of I guess we'd say boyfriends, but he also had a longtime partner who moved around with him when he lived in various countries, including England and France and Italy. And I didn't put the partner on the page, but he's there. I guess at the very end, he's sort of there in the background talking. But Sargent was so kind and had been through his own downfall, with this portrait of Madame X, which was the society woman who asked him to do this provocative portrait. But then when it came out, it ended up being more provocative, by tenfold than she meant to. And so society turned on her and him for doing this very kind of, it's not even, I guess, would you call that painting erotic? I think it's very
It's their
beguiling.
skin. Her pose is really compelling. I don't, to be fair, the dress is kind of low cut, but it's not. Yeah, it's not prurient. It's not,
Right.
it's not indecent.
Right.
And it is, by the way, it's currently at the MFA in Boston.
Oh, great. I think it was there. It's been there for a while, maybe, right? Because I think I saw it when I was back in undergrad. I think I remember seeing it there.
Oh, well, there's a whole Singer Sargent exhibit until January 15th.
Oh,
And
great.
so I want to, now after reading your book, I have to go see this
Yeah, I have to get there for
and
sure.
spend some time. Yeah.
Yeah. But he was so, I wanted him to be, because there's so many ways in which Leon is chewed up and spat out by the people he encounters. Like he's used for how he's useful to them and then they move on. And I did want this idea that can give you a really, I don't know, a negative impression of people as being users. And I think Sargent, I liked the idea of having him be a really sympathetic older figure in Leon's life. Like, Leon winds up spending the night at his house, but there's never a note of like that he's at risk or that Sargent has his own interest in Leon. It's more like someone who just wants to mentor and be kind to him. It's an important moment, I thought, to have in there.
Which, yeah, as you say, in a story filled with, you're surrounded by people you can't trust. He really comes across as an oasis for Leon. Let me, if you don't mind, I was going to ask you to read a bit on 184, 185, because Robert, the Count de Montesquieu, comes across, and I was glad you wrote about this in the afterword, because I came out thinking, I don't know what to make of this guy. And, is he as ruthless as Proust was, or at least in the book? Is he so self-loathing that he acts badly around others? And I just kept running through, okay, why? Why are you being like this? And the scene that really hit me in terms of, okay, I don't understand this guy at all.
Regressive Puritans, Robert muttered as they made their way up the creaking stairs. You wouldn't believe the laws that they have on the books here. The room had 2 twin beds against opposite walls, made up with lacy, old-fashioned linens, like they were child princes on a fairy tale journey. Leon was unsure what to do with himself when he returned from the hall bathroom. As he removed his clothes in front of Robert for the second time that day, he thought about leaving them off, of looking at Robert frankly instead of keeping his gaze trained on the floor. Leon plucked up his courage and did just that, standing naked by his bed for a long moment. What would it feel like to have Robert's delicate hands on his body, to cup Robert's jaw in his hand, to kiss those lips? It would be vile and wrong and against God. But that truth was feeling less and less real the more time he spent in Paris. Even if it was the sin he'd been taught, the alternative had begun to feel worse, to be a body alone in this world, alone forever.
And that's part of it. They're the historical characters, but you've also set this at an historical moment in terms of how the world looked at queer people. It's mentioned several times that there's this new word that has come into fashion, and that word is
homosexual.
Which, and younger readers, this being a YA thing, might not be aware of that. But the notion that homosexuality is something you are rather than a series of actions that you do, that it's identity, that's really pretty current. If you go back to ancient Rome, ancient Greece, to cultures all over the world, there are things you do, and they're either fine or they're not fine in that society, but they're just actions. And this changes the world, this one word.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly don't know how much we gained by moving to an identity-based model instead of an action-based model when we talk about sexuality. That this idea of like there's a valorization that happens, right? If this is what I am, it's harder for someone to deny it instead of like, this is what I did on Saturday night, right? Which someone say like, oh, just don't do that again, right?
Right.
So it's harder to take something away when you say like, I am this, and I think that does a world of good for LGBTQIA plus people as far as defending our natures against people who want us to just stop doing certain things. But at the same time, I think it would be hard to imagine the kind of like bi erasure that we have now if we didn't have this sort of like, oh, he's secretly gay, right? As an interpretation of how someone acts.
Hmm.
That we have this kind of limited binary thinking, this idea of just the event. There was homosexual activity, but there just weren't homosexuals as a noun, right?
Right.
So that it was something that could be more casually taken up or not taken up, and didn't have this kind of message about the entire identity of a person. I feel wistful for not having that in our culture now. Like
Hmm.
we can be a little bit. I miss that kind of casualness or playfulness that we might have had, with a different way of thinking about sex and sexuality.
It would change the dynamic of the political argument.
When Paris was really interesting at the time, so I think within high society, so like where Robert's circles were, you had a very, very progressive, permissive, open, liberal way of looking at what someone could be. Like, so behind doors, you'd have men kissing and holding each other, and this sense of limitlessness because of that social power that wealthy people had. And the poor had very little experience of that. And even the middle class were still in a society which in England, it was a capital punishment. France wasn't that bad, but was still definitely illegal. So you had this real sense of opening up behind closed doors and still being not being able to be out about who you were in ordinary public circles. So I think Leon has experienced growing. He grew up, in Vernon and was in this much more conservative society that loathed someone who was what they would call a sexual deviant. But in Paris, he's gotten to see this. It is possible for men to love men, and it's something that he wishes he could do. So I think he's kind of torn up by that disconnect, which is a more extreme version of a disconnect that I felt growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
And then that adds other layers of outsider looking in. You've got the gay versus straight. You've got the wealthy versus aspirational, let's say.
That's kind.
Yeah, but you also have country mouse, city mouse going on here with Leon. It's that they're and the irony. I don't want to spoil anything in your book. See, that was the thing. You and I could talk about queer ducks forever, and we weren't going to spoil anything. I'm trying to dance around things here so I don't ruin
Right.
your
No,
book.
you're right.
But that sense of he has a certain view of what his hometown is like and what it would be like if he had to stay there. And it is very much the approach I had to my hometown.
Mm.
This will kill me. I don't know that there is a place for people like me out there, but I know for damn sure it's not here.
Mm.
And he very much has that. But as he goes through this unjust experience in high society, he comes to see that he might have been wrong about that in some ways.
Yeah. So this Leon's home life, there was nothing in the historical record for me to find, and so I found myself butting up against, how what kind of journey I wanted him to have, like what I imagined for his end. And I think there's a way in which if I made him succeed on all counts, if he found romantic connection and musical fame, it would be hard to believe and also not true for what happened in history. But if he lost on all counts and like had this sort of life of being thwarted and also never reached his musical success that he had hoped for, that felt dispiriting, especially for a YA audience. And so I found myself wrestling with, how fulfilled could he live in the 1890s, as, someone with limited resources. Like Montesquieu, like Sargent lived with his partner throughout his whole life. They had an established partnership. Montesquieu lived with his assistant, Gabrielle Ituri, for his whole life, but they had more means than Leon. But I did start imagining, like, it's this way in which within a town, people just know who you are, and then all of a sudden, like, can accept you beyond if they happen to like you, right? Like they'll find ways, like even in the most conservative town, if someone
Right.
is well liked enough, they wind up, having a role in the society and they can pull it off. And so started imagining that for Leon, not him in particular, but his Felix, the boy from home that he falls
Yeah.
for, has this kind of longstanding connection with the town. I
Well,
thought
that's
he might be
maybe we
able to
should
pull
go
one
there.
through.
I wanted to, if you don't mind, I wanted to read with you a bit with the two of them. I asked to do this with you because it brings in some of the other queer folks who make an appearance. You have two cross-dressing women, one of whom obviously is historically accurate. I don't know if Beckwith is
No, Beckwith is my
no.
own creation. Yep.
Yeah, oh, I'm in love. I'm in love. Please get me Beckwith's number.
It turns
Uh,
out, by the way, that Beckwith is the name of Singer Sargent's roommate, a college roommate, way back. Someone who read the book wrote to me and said, "Was Beckwith a reference to Sargent's college roommate?" And no, I just pulled the name out of the ether.
no, 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 wrong answer. You've got to say, oh yeah, yeah.
Yes, I meant to do that.
Why, yes, I did.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Felix asks, are you afraid to be with him? Afraid? I don't know what you mean. Though, of course, Leon did know what Felix meant. He knew precisely. There was a generous quality to Felix's voice, though. His friend was curious to know, not judging. Leon realized he'd never seen Felix disgusted by anything, ever. I'm not afraid at all. Here in
Vernon.
Thank you. It feels like there are so many ways to become hated. Do you know what I mean? That you can be wrong in so many ways. And we spent our childhoods trying to be the correct sort of boys. But there's a society in Paris, the Count's Society, where you can instead say, I am me. I am this thing. And whatever that thing might be, no one gives you up for dead. No one starts praying for your soul. No one says you're not a man or not a person. Oh, there are plenty of ways to go wrong in Paris, don't mistake me. But it's not about being something immoral. Like, I met a countess who sometimes wears men's suits and calls herself Beckwith. And I met an actress who's playing Hamlet. Felix let out a long breath. His thighs were passing heat to Leon's as they rode. Hamlet is usually played by a man, Leon explained.
I know that, Felix said. He shifted the reins from one hand to the other. In the process, his arm pressed firmly into Leon's side, then relaxed down by Clementine's flank. You don't have to answer me if you don't want, but what exactly do you mean by this thing? It had been a long day, and Leon was suddenly afraid. Something was about to be put in words, and if it did, then it couldn't ever go back to being nameless. It would exist outside of him. What if saying something aloud now would mean never seeing Felix again? Would Felix then tell his mother if she asked why he never came around anymore? Would it turn everyone he'd ever known in his childhood against him? But it wasn't that worried him now. It was losing Felix, these legs wrapped around his hips, those arms that looked like they would be just a little salty if Leon licked their thick skin. Maybe one day those arms could be wrapped around Leon's body as they woke up in a country bed with sun streaming through a window. Leon? He couldn't put words to it, not yet. The chance that Felix would still accept him didn't outweigh the crushing risk. I don't think I know what I meant either, Leon said. I'm sorry. I guess I'm tired and I'm not making sense.
That is so vivid and it hurts so much. The fear of coming out and this being a YA novel, that is palpable in that scene. All of the things that you fear, rightfully or imaginarily, that will happen to you if you come out, they're all in there. But there's also the distance and the irony of those of us as the readers going, oh, come on. He knows. He just told you he knows. Say something.
Right.
And how sad it is that really hasn't changed all that much.
Yeah. When there's that feeling, the first time I had to say I'm gay, like it felt like the world could end when it happened. And then the first time the world didn't end, we moved on in the conversation, and like I said it, and I was still there, and they were still looking at me and talking to me, and I was like shocked that the world didn't end. And then the next time, I was only 80% worried the world was going to end this time, right? And I think Leon's in that first one where it feels so terrifying, and is holding back, like he's scared, which I get that.
Can I ask you about that? About the first time you told somebody?
Yeah, well, I actually don't. It was kind of a typical teen thing in a way. Like someone knew it for me and brought it up. My best friend's girlfriend saw that I was probably gay. She had moved from Roanoke, Virginia, which made her way more glamorous and interesting than us. You're probably gay or bi or something. Is that right? And I was like, oh, I guess so. So I was helped out. But certainly the ones that felt more like a coming out were coming out to my parents and my brother, and those, when they were surprised and initially didn't love the idea, but came around fairly quickly. So it was actually uh, pretty positive experiences.
One of the things that I was thinking about, and I don't know how much this goes into it, but when Leon plays, he goes to another place. He is transported to most of the time to being with Felix in the pastoral settings, and so his music is alive that way, and that's what makes it so special, is that he breathes life into it. And so I'm wondering how much of an analogy this patron system is for the current state of the publishing industry. Because publishing's a brutal industry, and you don't have to get a patron anymore, but you got to get a publisher. And for somebody who's not well connected, I mean, you see a lot of the internships in the publishing industry are those kinds of kids that you knew at Harvard, who have the connections. And I was just wondering if this stands as a comment of some way, even if you hadn't thought about it before now. Does it work?
Yes, yeah, it does. It definitely does. I hadn't really thought about it in these terms, but certainly in my subconscious, this was happening because I think, there's been a lot of critique lately about publishing that you have to survive 10 years at a barely livable salary in order to finally start making enough money that you can support yourself. And who can do that? But people who have families who can help them. So you do have a lot of upper middle class or even wealthier people in working in publishing for sure. But I know, I had this feeling of I've got one chance to do this. This is what I want to do most of my life, write books. And I will do whatever it takes. Like I was very E. Harrington about my own publishing career. And there were definitely, there were an editor I had in my past where it wasn't ever like a romantic thing, but it had romantic feelings to it. The fact that I was writing for him. And so I think I was engaging in a system, right, where I had some sort of something to offer beyond my writing, like just an exciting presence in this editor's life that always felt on the safe side, but I was happy to like dance around the sort of value added question.
It's a currency. It's a currency, Eliot, right? You realize you have something of value. How do I spend this?
Right. When if it's going to be the thing that lets me to do the thing I wanted to do most of my life, I was very, very willing. Yeah.
There is a scene, how do I want to phrase it, of frank, not graphic, but frank sexuality between Robert and Leon. Given the political climate we're in, where there are adults culling through the YA section of public libraries looking for titles they can object to, that seemed really brave to me.
Or slash foolish.
Yeah, okay, one of the two. It depends on that, whether or not books that are objected to are banned, whether you think that actually increases sales or not. But not so much, I'm not really asking about the pushback so much as why is it important to have a scene like that?
Well, I'm right now, so I'm doing, after we finish recording this, I'm off to do a banned book panel down at Manhattan Community College. So I'm like, I've been talking a lot about this book banning crisis, and I know this isn't exactly the point of your question, but it just makes me more and more outraged and feeling the need for sharing these stories. So it makes me not want to modify what I'm writing, but instead get louder about it. And I think, obviously that can only go so far if publishers stop acquiring books that have these moments. But so far, we're in this kind of unsteady, looking forward, still an alliance about it. And while that can be, I want to publish these works. And that scene between Leon and Robert is the accumulation of a really queasy romance. I told the marketing department when I wrote the book, like, we cannot market this as a romance because if someone goes in with romantic hopes, like, they're not going to be happy with this book.
That scene, yeah, pretty much dashes those hopes.
Like, it is the least sexy sex scene I've ever written, for sure. Super uncomfortable for all parties. But there's a way in which, especially in my teenage years and early 20s, like, there were a lot of sex scenes like that in my life, right? And you thought, based on all the sex scenes I'd seen in movies, I thought, like, oh, something is desperately wrong with me or the way I'm living my life.
Yes.
That this isn't like the over the kitchen table, like, instant crush of lips, like, instead it's just like, is this okay? Like, what?
Yeah, it's like that. Really? That's the outcome of this? This is okay, I guess. Yeah.
And this push by book banners to, like, get this sort of neuterized, blank version of what it means to be human and not have these uncomfortable, potentially dark, difficult, awkward moments is really keeping young readers from being able to feel seen, and, like, that this is really complicated. Like, two human bodies coming together sexually it's emotionally freighted for both parties, and it's a big deal, and it's not just bonfires and romance.
Yeah, and it speaks to ultimately the sort of values that the other side of that argument professes to be in favor of, is that if you don't want to have awkward, queasy-inducing experiences, then you need to talk up front, and you need to respect each other and know what the other person wants and doesn't want, and have an actual healthy encounter. It's not don't be sexual, but it's be human while you're being sexual, and that's kind of the point that they gloss over.
Yeah.
What is it that you want a YA reader to take away from this, particularly a young gay man reader?
I guess I definitely never feel like I want to impart a message, but sort of questions I was interested in looking at in the book were what you feel like you need to offer and what you really do need to offer, like, and how those might be different in a life. And also, I think it's useful for young queer people to live queer experiences from other eras, just to know where we've come from, how we've progressed, how things are still the same. I think it's important, and even like the 80s, it's difficult to get current teenagers to realize what the 80s were like. So much less the 1880s. Yeah.
You might as well be talking about the Civil War.
Right. Totally.
I read over the summer, T.J. Klune's Extraordinaries trilogy. I don't know if
I've read The House in the Cerulean Sea, but I haven't read his other stuff. Yeah.
Every time that book comes across the tables at the bookstore where I work, I hug it. It's really, it's embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. But in The Extraordinaries, there's this just glorious young gay man who's the protagonist. He has a single dad. He lost his mom when he was young. And his dad, in each of the three books, manages to try to help him with something practical in terms of gay sex. And over the course of the three books, it becomes more and more of, at first it's this abstract, oh, Jesus, Dad, stop that. I don't want to hear this. But like in the second book, they make dental dams together. And in the third, he's trying to teach his son.
Folks, it's Claire interrupting. Had a little tech glitch here, so I will pick it up a couple seconds later.
Okay, there are realities to sex. It's not that Hollywood bend them over the kitchen table, as you say, that you need to you need to prepare. You need to be thinking about things ahead of time. And it shows dad's love that this guy who's a cop and not at all the person you would expect to be doing this is like, no, let me help you. I read the instructions on this enema box. And so with that one, it seemed to me incredibly important that kids who are not getting any of this information in high school health classes could read this in a funny, exciting, comic book kind of narrative and come away thinking, oh, okay, well, that's, yeah. It must be something people do because here it is.
Yeah. When getting to witness these stories of like either healthy, frank supportiveness or manipulative user behavior, like get to read those in books gives young people the equipment to recognize both those for good or for bad in their own lives as it comes. And it's ironic, that all the accusations of groomer and pedophile that get thrown at writers of LGBTQ books for young people, when actually like reading about like navigation of sexuality is a way to prevent grooming.
Right.
Because then you're like, oh, I know, like I wouldn't want to be treated like the Count treated Leon. Not that Montague was a groomer, but he certainly wasn't a positive presence in his life.
No, get unhealthy relationship. Get away.
Yeah.
Run, Leon, run. You're going to be using that. You're going to go to your next book talk and you're going to use that. All right. I know you have to go. So I've got two less than profound questions for you.
Perfect.
On page 244, Leon is in a rough way. He is all of this abuse by Proust, by Montesquieu, by everybody in the society is all crashing down on him, and he's realizing I can't even get my next meal. I've got nothing. And somewhere in the middle of the page, he goes out for a walk and he says, you say, narrator, Leon chose the paths that would take him near ducks. It's this sort of blatant self-promotion.
Have you heard of Queer Ducks and Other Animals,
No.
The Natural World of Animal Sexuality?
No, tell me about it.
It's a YA book. Actually, I wrote it. Let me give you the ISBN number so you can order yourself a copy. Yeah,
I'm gonna stop this interview soon because I got to go order. What did you say it was? Queer Ducks?
Queer Ducks and Other Animals, The Natural World of Animal Sexuality. And actually, I'm working on the sequel to The Darkness Outside Us right now, my sci-fi book from 2 years ago, and I'm realizing there's ducks in that too. So I clearly I have a thing.
Eliot, I'm so disappointed.
It's called branding. Get with the program, Claire.
Yeah, sci-fi is not my genre, but I read the first one. It was duck free. It was relatively mallard free.
Not a duck. Yeah, relatively mallard free could be a good cover blurb.
If you need me to write that, I'll be happy.
Thank you.
All right, the other one, much more important. I am on page 176. I'm going to read you a paragraph, and I have a feeling I know where you got this. But I see the smile. I'm so happy. Charlotte sucked in a long breath and held it before releasing it noiselessly. Sometimes I like to put a daisy chain in my hair and jump along the riverbanks. It doesn't make me the queen of fairies. Tell me. I want to hear it. Tell me.
I'm sorry, I have to go. The Wi-Fi is breaking up.
This is an homage, a reference to the 1988 classic
Working Girl.
Yes.
That is like one of my very favorite movies. I'm so glad you brought it's a Joan Cusack line. Sometimes I like to dress in my underwear and dance around my room. It doesn't make me Madonna.
That almost nothing about that movie has stayed with me except that quote. I use that all the time. Maybe it's just me being trans, but I have used that line so many times.
The other good quote from that movie that Joan Cusack has is $5,000. It's not even leather.
Now I went back to look at this, and listeners, I will put the link in the show notes. But I went back to watch that little clip. It's available as a nice 12-second clip on YouTube. Go back and look at, well, first of all, Joan Cusack is a national treasure. She should from here on out, she should be in all the movies.
I agree.
But if you go back and watch that clip, stop to admire the hair and the eyeshadow. It does not get any more 1980s than that.
There's a lot of elevation in that hair.
It is perfect. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and what better name for Madonna than Queen of the Fairies? Like, it was the most obvious swap through that was 19th century relevant. Yeah, actually, so this is probably shouldn't even admit this, but I love Working Girl so much. I actually broke it down scene by scene to see how it made the story of this Melanie Griffith character so emotionally compelling and fun and interesting. And Charming Young Man is basically like beat by beat. 1988, Mike Nichols' film Working Girl just translated to the 1890s in Paris. So the secret is out.
So you youngsters, if you're interested in what Harrison Ford looked like before he was in his 90s, please go back and watch this movie because it's a very young Harrison. Yeah, absolutely. But just fast forward to the Joan Cusack moments because God, I love her.
I'm delighted you caught that reference. I'm delighted. Yeah.
I was like, how can that not be? But I was afraid to ask.
Well, as soon as you said the page and I turned to it, I was like, oh no. Called out.
Oh. Well, Eliot, thank you for coming back. Next book, don't even wait for me to call. Just schedule something.
Well, this is a total delight. You're one of the best interviewers I've ever gotten a chance to talk to a second time around. So thank you, Claire, for having me on.
Few housekeeping items before we go. The next game night at the Blue Orchid in New Haven is Friday, December 15th. We'll be playing Pictionary. Sam and I, that's photographer Sam Avery, had a blast at last month's event, but to be honest, most of the attendees were Sam's friends. We need better Transqat representation. I've checked the official Pictionary rules, and you don't have to be queer to play. Hope to see you there. If you're going to TCNE's first event in Boston, sign up for the Transqat presentation on Friday, January 26th from 10 to 12:15. I'm also hoping to table in the vendor's room. More information on that as it becomes available. On January 6th, I'll be co-presenting with friend of the show Tony Ferriolo at an event for Alex Inc. I'll post the flyer at the Transqat website, so if you're in the Shoreline area, consider attending. Lastly, another plug for the short story Always Love Me. It's available through Amazon. Buy it, read it, leave a review. I'm working on a new project for the same publisher, and if they see positive reviews, it'll grease the wheels. Because I guess greasy wheels are important in publishing. This has been Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. Thank you for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Claire McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
QAT.com.
There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies.
Your monies.
Your monies.
Not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
Or ask Claire a question?
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.